Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
It was a typical Wednesday. Get up and get ready for work. My wife, Beth, with whom we've lived for 5 years, will sleep a little longer before she needs to get up with the kids. I work at a decent accounting firm with about 100 people here in Guelph, Ontario, and my wife works as a manager in a retail store. I have a regular job from 9 to 5, and she works as a manager at a women's clothing store until closing. It sucks because we only spend 2 evenings together with the kids, but for now, it works for us. She drops them off at daycare during the week, and I pick them up on my way home from work. We have to pay for 5 days of daycare if we want to keep their spots, so usually that means she keeps the kids on one of her days off during the week and then handles family duties on another day with the kids at daycare. A few more years, and she'll be promoted to regional manager, which will mean she'll have to travel, but it will also mean she'll have much more flexibility in her schedule, and we'll be able to have dinner together most evenings. Beth just came back from maternity leave, so we've been living with our 1-year-old son, George, and 3-year-old daughter, Belinda, for a month now. Today was one of her days off. We're still renting an apartment. Once everything settles, we'll start looking for a house. Things are going okay. It's not ideal, but you have to work with the schedule your career gives you. We knew this when we decided to have kids. I pulled into the parking lot when I heard someone calling my name. "Francis, good morning." It was my buddy Jerry, whom I've known since we both tried to hit on the same girl at the same time at a party in the first week of college. "Good morning, Jerry," I replied. "Have you heard anything about today's important meeting?" "No, but I had to leave early yesterday," he said. "I'm sure we'll hear about it this morning. You know how the boss always likes to make morning announcements to wake everyone up?" He smiled back at me and gave my shoulder a pat as we entered. I sat down at my desk and started the workday. Invitations came, and I think it was all done beforehand, because they divided us into different conference rooms. I bumped into Jerry on the way to the meeting. He was supposed to go to a different room than me, but he decided to come with me. I had to realize something was wrong when someone was standing guard at the door of each room, and Jerry was sent to his old room. There were 12 of us in our meeting room when the company president and the HR/office manager walked in. We all nervously glanced at each other. The president began. "Unfortunately, I come bearing bad news. We've just lost the contract. Since you're all members of this team, it affects each of you. For some of you, today is your last day. For others, we'll keep you on during this transitional period."
I'm sorry.
After that, I just tuned out. Then Lisa, the HR manager, started handing out our packages. I was informed enough to know that today was my last day. We were all told to go home and review our packages. We were supposed to come back to the office later to collect the contents of our desks. Lisa patted me on the shoulder. "Francis, I'm really sorry, but it's time to go." I simply nodded and stood up. I was still in shock from the announcement as we were escorted out of the building. Someone went to our desks and gathered our jackets and bags. They handed them to us as we walked out the door. I sat in the car when the news finally hit me. Tears started flowing. Beth had just returned from maternity leave. What are we going to do? About 10 minutes later, I finally pulled myself together. I didn't need to get into a car accident on top of everything else. I noticed that a few more people were still sitting in their cars. I looked at Sally, the head of my team. She was crying so hard that her makeup started to run. I sadly nodded at her and headed home. I walked through the door. Beth emerged from around the corner. "Francis, what are you doing home?" That's all I managed to say before flopping down on the couch. She sat down beside me. "You know I work for Henderson's?" She nodded. "Well, the firm lost that account, and I got laid off." Tears welled up in my eyes again. "For a few months?" she asked.
No, forever.
They sent me home with a packet of papers to go through. I expected hugs of support and phrases like, "What are we going to do?" Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a wild/disappointed expression on her face, the kind she usually gets when plans fall apart. Finally, I hugged her and said, "Don't worry, we'll be okay." I got up, grabbed the packet of papers, and headed to my home office to review them. As I went through them, I overheard Beth on the phone. I couldn't hear the conversation well, but caught snippets and fragments. "We need to cancel. I don't know when. Me too. Who was that? I asked. There was a pause, and then she replied. Neighbor. She was supposed to come over with her kids for a playdate, but I told her we have to cancel. I thought to myself, funny, I don't remember her mentioning meeting with the neighbor before. The neighbor's kids are older than ours, so there aren't many playdates. I returned to the papers. I wanted to figure out where we stood with this. I'd been with the firm for 6 years, and they gave us 2 weeks for each year, so that amounted to about 3 months' worth of pay. At least in the short term, we were okay. Then I uploaded my resume. Better to dive into this quickly. The next hour was spent updating it. I always managed to stay focused on the tasks at hand. Update the resume by lunchtime, and then start job hunting in the second half of the day. Beth peeked in a few times to see how I was doing. There was still a worried look on her face. I told her about the 3-month severance package and reassured her that we would be okay. Jerry called during lunchtime to check in on me. Doing the best I can under the circumstances, I told him, "How's Beth taking it?" He asked. "You know, she's not reacting the way I thought she would. Maybe it's nothing, but instead of worrying, I get the sense that I'm disrupting some of her plans," I said. "I'm sure it's because you guys have never been in this situation before, and she just doesn't know how to react yet," he suggested. "Probably you're right." I paused. "Maybe we could meet up sometime in the evening once I figure everything out?" "Sounds like a great idea," he replied. After lunch, I browsed through several job websites and managed to find 5 to 6 job postings to apply to. I spent the second half of the day writing cover letters, tweaking my resume for each position, and submitting applications. All that's left now is to wait. Dinner was a bit quiet, but Belinda decided she would be the entertainment committee and had us all laughing. We didn't want to lose our spots at daycare and wanted the kids to continue their usual daily routine, so they went to daycare on regular days. However, Beth decided to be a bit more playful before going to work. I hadn't seen her like this before. Due to our work schedules and since our second child was born, our sex life had been happening about once a week, and honestly, there wasn't anything special about it. Usually, we were too tired. However, on the first full day after I dropped the kids off at daycare, she surprised me by wearing something sexy and dragging me into the bedroom. We had sex like rabbits for an hour until she had to leave for work. We used condoms. We weren't sure if we wanted to try number 3, and Beth always had a tough adjustment period when she took the pill, so she refrained from taking it until we were sure we were done having kids. When we relaxed in bed, I asked, "Where did that come from?" "I thought you needed something to lift your spirits," she replied with a smile and a kiss. I wasn't about to complain. After she left, I continued my job search. Now it was my main job. A few weeks later, sex became the only good thing. I was the youngest of the 6 people who got laid off, and the economy was starting to decline. So although I had a few interviews, nothing resembling an offer came through. I heard back from another company. They scheduled an interview for the next day. I called Beth at work to tell her about it. She said she knew it would work out. She just knew. The interview was bright and early. This job was in Kitchener, so it took me about half an hour to get to the interview. I thought the interview went really well, and I was confident in my chances. They said they had a few more candidates to interview, and they would let me know next week. I came home excited, but I was puzzled when I returned. Beth met me at the door and asked how everything went. It wasn't so much what she said, but her overall demeanor. She had the same satisfied look that appears after we make love, except we hadn't done that today. Perhaps my expression gave something away. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Oh, nothing."
Infine.
"I was just thinking about one of the questions they asked me," I said. "Well, I'm sure you're okay," she said, hugging me. That was another oddity. I smelled her hair. Usually, she showered right before leaving for work, about an hour from now, but she had already showered. Something wasn't adding up. Beth didn't approach me for sex over the next few days. It was as if she had somehow taken a pill and didn't need another one yet. While waiting for the results of the last interview, another company from Kitchener reached out to me, and I scheduled another morning interview. Today, Beth was supposed to work again, so when I finished showering, I marked Beth's shampoo bottle to see if she used it. Then I positioned it so it wouldn't get wet if Beth took a shower. After that, I took a picture of the setup to compare later. Beth kissed me for luck, and I left. I managed to focus on the task at hand, and I think the interview went pretty well. Unfortunately, the interviewer didn't feel the same way. She was honest and said that since I had spent most of the last 6 years with just one client, I didn't have the broader experience she was looking for. On a slightly positive note, she said she liked me, and she would reach out if anything else came up. The journey home wasn't a happy one. I know it hasn't been that long since I was laid off, but I was hoping for more interviews and more positive feedback. It didn't help when I got a call from the previous company, and they turned me down too. They didn't explain why, so I just thanked them for their consideration and hung up, still batting a big fat 0. I got home, and Beth was just as she was after the previous interview. She looked thoroughly fucked. Again. I broke the bad news to her from today's interview, which unfortunately didn't seem to affect her mood, and then apologized and went to the bathroom. I decided to hold off on sharing news about the previous interview. If the shower was any indication of what I expected, then I needed that company for the plan. Damn, I muttered quietly to myself. Both hers and my shampoos were moved, and they were both wet. I didn't even need the picture I took. She wasn't the only one who needed cleaning up. She had definitely been fucked that I sat on the toilet and took a deep breath. What else could go wrong in my life? I sat there for about 10 minutes when Beth knocked on the door. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. "Just a moment," I responded. I opened the door. Well, at least this time she seemed to have an expression on her face that showed some concern for me. However, it wasn't because of the job search that I had a depressed look on my face. She hugged me. "Look, we'll get through this. It's only been a few weeks. Keep applying, and eventually something will work out." I managed to give her a slight smile, and she hugged me again and kissed me on the cheek. "Sorry, but I need to get ready for work," she said. I stepped out of the bathroom, and she took her usual shower, probably to keep up appearances. She showered and left for work. I sent out a few more resumes, expanding the search area and types of positions, and I devised my simple plan. That evening, I had a great dinner and played with the kids before putting them to bed. Beth came home. I shared the great fake news with her. "Beth, I had an interview a couple of days ago. They asked me to come in for a second interview tomorrow morning." She hugged me and said, "That's fantastic news. Hopefully, things will work out tomorrow." I responded, "I'm sure they will." And then, "Definitely not the way either of us hopes." The next morning, I woke up and took a shower. I got ready as if I were actually going for the second interview. Beth got up to have breakfast and wish me luck. I returned to the bedroom to finish getting dressed. While I was alone in the room, I peeked through the corner of the curtain, just enough to see through. Then she kissed me goodbye, and I headed to the door. As before, I dropped the kids off at daycare, but this time, instead of heading to Kitchener, I drove back home. I parked around the corner and walked towards the house. I saw a car in the driveway and immediately knew who it was. It was her ex-boyfriend, Bill. They dated in high school but broke up when he started working at his father's auto repair shop, and she went to university in Toronto. He got married when she was in her 3rd year of university, after he knocked up one of her friends. My wife was at the wedding. All of this happened before I met Beth. I knew him well, as we would see them a couple of times a year. Now he runs his father's auto repair shop after his father retired following a heart attack. He and his wife have 3 kids now. I sneaked around to the back of the apartment building. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, and I could hear them moaning and screaming in bed. I turned my phone to video mode and started recording. I was tall enough to reach out and aim the camera towards the window. I could see them on the phone screen. I didn't want to record more than I needed to, as I didn't want her or some nosy neighbor catching me. A nosy neighbor being a curious onlooker, not a voyeur but more like a busybody. I needed the video to capture their faces. Luckily, they changed positions, and I got my version of the money shot, a clear image of their faces. I stopped recording and sneaked back to my car. I drove to the other end of town and went into a diner to stop and think. Obviously, a divorce lawyer was at the top of the list. Fortunately, since Beth worked in the afternoon, I had plenty of time to find and call a lawyer. But Bill couldn't get away scot-free for his role in destroying my family. Sipping coffee, I decided to take a look at Bill. I opened his social media page. He didn't have much, so I switched to his wife. It seemed like she posted every minute of her life. I scrolled through all the posts and pictures. Then things got even worse. Their oldest daughter just turned 9 years old. Bill's wife decided to post a series of photos of herself at different ages. Bill's daughter looked almost exactly like my daughter at age 3. Fuck. How long has Beth been his? Are the kids even mine? I tapped on the table, drawing everyone's attention in the diner. I squeaked out, "Excuse me," paid the bill and left. Anyway, Beth had to wait for me at home. I managed to pull myself together when I returned home. She asked how it went, and I told her I didn't get the job. It was an easy way to disguise my true emotions at the time. I hid in my study while she got ready for work. Before leaving, she stuck her head in the door and said, "Don't worry, it'll work out next time." I managed to smile, got up, and hugged her. I had to maintain appearances. As soon as she left, I called a friend who was a divorce attorney. I knew him from university. Eventually, he was admitted to the bar 2 years ago. His mother was screwed over by her divorce attorney when his parents split. He hated his father for cheating on her and wanted to make sure no one else would get screwed by an unfaithful spouse. He would be perfect for me. "Jim, unfortunately, I'm going to need your services. Could you take me today?" I said after getting through to him. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure, and I have video evidence to prove it," I replied. "All right, I'm really sorry. I can fit you in at 1:30, he said. I entered his office at 1:30. We sat down and got to business. "Francis, I'm really sorry you're here under these circumstances." I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and turned on the video. "Good. You're sure?" he said. "Do you know how long this has been going on?" Then I told him about what I found on social media. "Do you know how I can verify if they're mine?" Unfortunately, I've dealt with similar cases before where paternity needed to be verified. The test isn't complicated, but for court purposes, sample collection needs to be witnessed. I paused for a moment. It was Friday. "Could you do the testing, say, next Wednesday?" "Yes, that's possible. You're still picking them up from daycare when she's working, right?" he asked. "Of course." "Why don't you invite the kids over for dinner at my place? They can play with my son, and at some point, I can invite a few witnesses, and then we can take the samples." "That sounds great. I'll feel relieved knowing that there's doubt in my mind now." "Francis, don't worry. I'll handle everything. DNA test results take 5 to 7 business days, so it will be a few weeks before we get the results. Right now, divorce in Ontario can't be finalized until you've lived separately for at least a year. But there are mitigating circumstances, such as marital infidelity, so I'll argue for an exception to this rule. I suggest we hold off on filing until we have the DNA test results." I nodded in agreement. He continued, "As for money, you've done a lot for me over the years. We'll sort it out, and you won't have to pay me until we come to an agreement." "Thank you. I appreciate it," I said. We shook hands, and I left. I continued on my way. I decided to drop by the clinic without an appointment. I needed to know if I was clear of STIs. With the way things were going, I couldn't count on anything. It's one thing when you're in a bad situation but have a plan of action and can keep busy. It's another thing when you have to wait. Fortunately, the kids kept me occupied over the weekend, and the last dose of Bill seemed to satisfy her for the moment. The realization that the kids might not be mine plunged me into a slight depression. That was the worst part of all this. But if it were true, Beth's betrayal would be utterly unforgivable, and I'd have to move on. Now, my problem was getting through Monday and Tuesday when Beth was off work. I decided we should go on day trips to occupy our minds and think about what Beth and I were doing. On Monday, we went to a nearby animal safari. You know, where you drive through the park and baboons try to rip the side mirrors off your car. On Tuesday, we went to the water park. The best part was that we were all too exhausted for any extracurricular activities. Wednesday came, and Beth returned to work. I think she missed Bill because she tried to initiate sex with me after dropping off the kids on Wednesday morning. I just sank into depression and said I wasn't in the mood because I hadn't received any calls or emails about work for several days. It was weighing on me, but not enough for her to sleep with me. I told her that Jim had called me after hearing about my job loss and invited me to dinner. I decided I needed to be honest with Beth in case Belinda said something to her. Today I decided to keep the kids with me. They might be mine, or they might not be, but I've cared for them and will be their father until I'm told otherwise. I got a call from the clinic, and at the moment, I'm free from STIs. For now, I need to maintain appearances, so while we're still using condoms, I can enjoy some free fucks. I just won't do anything that could expose me. It was time for dinner, and we went to Jim's for dinner. Jim and his wife only discussed job searches and kids, without touching on anything about us or Beth. After dinner, Jim's witnesses showed up. George was calm. He didn't disclose any information, and we got his sample in a way that Belinda didn't notice. For Belinda, we played a game. We had ice cream. I argued with her that a cotton tampon is better than a spoon for eating ice cream. She thought I was silly, and we both used cotton swabs to scoop up some ice cream and then sucked it to remove the ice cream from them. Then we handed our tampons to Uncle Jim, who quickly passed them to the witnesses. One of them took swabs for analysis in the morning. Belinda thought the game was silly. Spoons are much better. Samples were taken, and all I had to do was wait for the results for a week or so. During the following week, I applied for other jobs and didn't get any interviews. I fucked Beth quite regularly, but no oral or anything else that could give me what I didn't want. Jim called and asked me to come to the office on Friday morning. The test results were in. I stopped by during our lunch break. There was my buddy Jerry. I had a feeling it was a bad omen. Francis, the DNA test results are in, and they confirm that, although they have the same father, it's not you. He paused, guessing how I'd react. I just covered my face with my hands and cried. Jerry sat beside me and hugged me. Francis, I'm so sorry. After a few minutes, I finally sat up and wiped my face. I knew it was a likely outcome. Over the past few weeks, I'd had plenty of time to consider various scenarios. And now what? I asked. Jim said, well, I suppose you want to take legal action, right? I looked at Jerry. He nodded in support. Certainly, definitely. However, I've had plenty of time to think. Can we file for divorce without mentioning infidelity or the children, and then amend it to include that later? Yes, but why? Jim asked. I want her off balance. I want to hit her twice. First with the divorce, and then with infidelity and paternity, I said. We can do that. How do you want to handle this? Jim asked. Here's what I want to do, I began. Jerry offered his spare bedroom if I needed a place to stay. I told him I would definitely take him up on that. Since we were renting and saving for a place of our own, all our assets were in cash, around $60,000, not counting our retirement funds. When I got my new job, I was earning about the same as Beth, so now that child support was off the table, it should be a clean financial split. But I was planning to play a little dirty. Jerry took a day off to help me. I think he planned to just keep me company. I had other plans. We went to thrift stores for used clothing. Then we went back to my place. We started packing my stuff, and then we stuffed them with the used clothes I bought at thrift stores. I even bought a few tattered jackets to replace my suits. I just left some clothes I didn't care about to wear on weekends, and a suit for Monday. I just wanted the closets to look roughly the same. Since she worked all weekend, I bet she wouldn't notice the changes, but an empty closet might raise suspicion. I planned to pack more over the weekend, but the remaining items I wanted would easily fit in the trunk of my car, and I would gather them on Sunday before she returned home from work. Monday was the D-Day. The day of the divorce, that is. I told Beth that I finally had another interview on Monday morning. I knew she would be served at home at 10 a.m., so I made sure to sit in the car with the rest of the items in the trunk right around the corner, watching as the process server arrived at the apartment building. I headed to Jerry's. Jerry and his wife were at work, so they gave me the key to their house. On the way, my phone started ringing and then buzzing with texts. I changed my ringtone for her calls to George Michael's Freedom, so I just let it ring and ring. I would check the messages later over a glass of wine. I parked the car in the garage and closed the door, just in case she came looking for me. I had just finished moving the boxes into their spare bedroom when Jim called. Jim, this call is so unexpected. What's up? I asked with a smile. I heard him laugh, and he said, For some reason, Beth is blowing up my phone line. I chuckled. What did you tell her? Well, as soon as I got her to calm down, I told her to find a lawyer and have her lawyer call me. You won't be talking to her. You'll deal only through me. Great. And let's wait a bit before meeting with them. I want her to simmer down a bit, I said, and I hung up. The next calls were from her parents. I liked them, but I needed to play all the cards before I talked to them about their daughter and her behavior. Jerry called about an hour later to check on me. He said Beth called him. He told her he didn't know where I was, and then was shocked when she mentioned divorce papers. I should get an award for my acting, he said. On Wednesday, her lawyer called Jim. They wanted the meeting to be next Monday. Jim asked how long I wanted to delay this meeting. I thought about it. Monday was her day off. I wanted to enjoy the weekend, so I asked for the meeting to be scheduled for this Friday. Make her take the day off for it. Friday came. The meeting was scheduled after lunch at Jim's office. I arrived there before lunch and had lunch with Jim. I didn't want to run into Beth on the way. They arrived. She looked like crap. Jim began speaking when Beth interrupted him. Why? She asked, and I remained silent. I just looked at her. Jim continued. It will become evident soon. Now let's consider our proposal. Then her lawyer spoke up. This proposal is crap. You're asking for alimony. Jim intervened. Only until Francis finds a job, and no alimony for either party once he does. Then her lawyer's face turned angry. And there's no mention of alimony. Jim glanced at me and smirked. Well, the father of the children should pay alimony, right? The other lawyer looked at him in confusion and said, well, yeah. Beth's expression looked as if she were staring at an anvil about to fall on her. Well, then she should sue the father for alimony, Jim declared. He leaned back in his chair, as if he had just stated the obvious to those who still hadn't grasped it fully. But he's the father, argued the other lawyer. Beth looked like she was about to faint, repeating no again and again. Then Jim pulled out a few more papers and a USB drive. We're going to file an amendment to the divorce petition. He handed the flash drive and one sheet of paper to the other lawyer. First, to expedite the divorce due to marital infidelity. There's a wonderful video on this drive of Beth with her ex-boyfriend. Make sure you have popcorn ready when you watch it. Her lawyer looked shocked, and Beth started to cry. She began to speak, I'm sorry, but Jim cut her off. Jim pulled out a second stack of papers. The Second Amendment pertains to the issue of alimony. The DNA test results show that Francis is not the father of Beth's children. We can speculate who the father is, but we'll leave that for Bill's wife to find out. Beth must have known about this because the crying stopped and she asked, What do you mean by Bill's wife? This was the final surprise. Jim continued, Well, right now, I have someone delivering a letter of explanation, a copy of the video on another USB drive, and a copy of the DNA test results to Bill's wife. Also, there's my card in there, as I'm offering to represent her. Beth showed her true colors and stood up for Bill. But this would ruin their marriage. Jim smiled. I just leaned back in my chair and enjoyed the show. I didn't need to contribute anything. Breaking up their marriage is a given. Bill's father passed ownership rights to Bill when his health declined. As I understand it, Bill's wife is the office manager, effectively running the place. In my letter to her, I've outlined my proposal for how their car dealership should be. They don't have a prenup. Beth started crying again. Then Jim looked at her lawyer. Why don't you review what I've provided, and we can meet early next week? He then extended his hand, and the other lawyer, who was still trying to process everything, absent-mindedly shook Jim's hand and led Beth out of the office. Beth turned to say something to me, but I just turned my back to her and walked into Jim's office. Another month passed, but we finally reached an agreement. I waived all alimony, but received what I proposed. Bill's wife, however, was playing hardball. She waived alimony and child support in favor of full ownership of the car dealership. She and Jim even secured a court order for a third party to handle the accounting books to ensure neither party was embezzling from the business during the divorce proceedings. However, this meant that Bill's income took a sharp hit, and he still had to pay alimony and child support to Beth. He couldn't dip his fingers into the cash register anymore. Bill moved in with Beth. It was inevitable. However, Now Beth had to pay rent and daycare fees on her own. She had to dip into her half of the savings. It didn't last long. Despite my divorce being settled, it was several more months before it became official, and I still needed to find a job. My severance pay survived the divorce process, but it's about to end soon. And then the phone rang. A woman on the other end was interviewing me in Kitchener. They still didn't have a position for me here, but she called to see if I was interested in relocating. They were opening a branch in another province and were interested in whether I wanted to be part of that team. It was a fresh start that I needed. Jerry and his wife were happy for me, but sad to see me go. For the next 2 weeks, I worked in the Kitchener office for training before moving to Charlottetown. I packed all my things and was ready to leave. I said goodbye to Jerry and headed for the exit. I decided to drive by the old apartment one last time. As far as I understood, there was so much tension in the auto shop that Bill decided to work at a different shop until a divorce agreement was reached. If his wife left, he would have to pay her more interim payments. I parked for a minute, just thinking about what could have been. Then I saw Bill rushing out of the apartment building, with Beth following closely behind him. I saw her throw a shoe at him, glad she's enjoying paradise.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.